before we get into the other quarterbacks, Nathan, there were some other transfers in the secondary. Just who were those guys? Who else has Ohio State lost to the transfer portal between the last time we sat down to record a pod and right now?
Well, what's funny is I had scheduled a text to go out at like 9 a.m. this morning, which again is earlier than we usually send it out, to wrap people up on all the transfer portal stuff that happened as I was trying to write other things. I was up very late Sunday night into Monday morning writing things because I kept getting delayed by having to write about Ohio State people going into the portal. Parker Lewis, the kicker, went in the portal. That he had kind of become sort of an afterthought anyway because Jaden Fielding had won the job. So it'll be interesting to see, do they put Fielding on scholarship? Do they use that scholarship somewhere else? I don't know. Kind of a side note. But then, yes, we're down to one. Sonny Styles is now the only defensive back who signed for the 2022 class who is still in this program. So not even 2 full years later, everybody else has cycled out. Ryan Turner had gone in the portal while we were on the pod on Sunday. And then Jair Brown, fellow cornerback, also went in the portal, and then Kai Stokes also went in the portal. And those last two, so Ryan Turner, we were kind of like, hey, that makes sense. Like, it seems like he might be kind of blocked. Good luck to him. Brown and Stokes surprised me a little bit. Now, Brown, maybe it should have told us something that I forgot to mention him when we were talking about the reasons that Ryan Turner was kind of blocked potentially from a 2-deep role, which should tell you that Brown may also have been on the outside of that looking in, depending on what these, just how much Jermaine Matthews and Calvin Simpson-Hunt had progressed as true freshmen. I don't know if this also tells us that he knows what Denzel Burke and Jordan Hancock are planning. That's just a thing to keep in the back of your mind, that if one of those guys has let it be known that he's maybe not ready to go to the NFL, then that makes it even tougher to climb up the depth chart, obviously. But Brown had such a good freshman season, and we were all really impressed with him. And so were the coaches. Like, we would ask them, and they were kind of very effusive in their praise. He got pushed into a tough spot, having to start his second game ever in the Big Ten opener against Wisconsin, and held his own and looked like he was going to be a guy that would just be a part of the room long term. And I don't know that he was ever going to grow into a starter, but you could see him growing into part of that rotation and and helping solidify that position. And this past year had basically no role. And that reversal of that momentum may have been a thing that prompted him to look somewhere else. And all those things are true of Kai Stokes, but even more so. I mean, he was the first freshman to lose his black stripe in the spring of 2022. So the first of the early enrollees came in, made a huge splash at a time when, frankly, there was a room to make a splash in that safety room, right? And he did so, played several games last year as a true freshman. We all thought, even as they were bringing in, Josh Proctor makes a surprising decision to come back for a 6th year. They bring in Jahad Carter from Syracuse. Obviously Sonny Styles is already here. They start talking about cross-training cornerbacks, maybe at nickel. Even through all that in the preseason, we thought, well, but Kai Stokes is still hanging around. Like, there's a future here for him. He looked so good as a freshman. And then he had no role this year. And a lot of it was, again, because of those people I just mentioned. 2 things I would say. Josh Proctor came back for a 6th year and stuck. And that was the first time he had stuck. And that changed the dynamic in that room. And also Malik Hartford and the debut that he made and came on. And now you can look at that room and you're like, okay, well, next year at those back safeties, you're looking at maybe Jahad Carter, but definitely Malik Hartford. And I still think this is a position now where Ohio State has to even more so be involved probably in the portal. I had ranked them in like the top half of positions where they probably needed to look for portal help just from a depth standpoint. I think that's even more true now than it was before. But for whatever reason, like that next step that you thought might have pushed for real playing time didn't happen. And it was there to be taken. Like, Proctor was hurt at one point. Obviously, Lathan Ransom got hurt late in the season. And they always kept turning to Malik Hartford, sort of jumping right over Kai Stokes. And if you looked ahead to the future and if you always saw that you were going to be bumping your head on a starter that has from a younger class, I guess that's why you look to move on too.
Yeah, that's 2 guys that got jumped. Jair Brown was once the first member of the Ohio State 2022 class when he was still living in New Orleans before he moved back home to Cincinnati. So but I mean, it's it's another hit at the depth, but to your point, Nathan, I mean, the top of the room still feels pretty solidified, both of those spots, with Sonny Styles coming back, Malik Hartford coming back, Jahad Carter coming back. And we're saying all this, we're recording this Monday morning, so we don't know if anything else has changed as we're recording this. Other things could be happening. We do know this. We're in transfer portal season, and a lot could be happening. But right now, the room still looks pretty bright for both the safety and the cornerback room with, as I mentioned, Malik Hartford, Sonny Styles, Jahad Carter, and then the cornerback spot. Regardless, Davis and Igbenogson is back for year 3 and year 2 in this program with Jermaine Matthews and Calvin Simpson-Hunt. Okay. I'm not even going to touch the Parker Lewis part of this because that's just another. Okay, Parker Fleming. Anyway, let's get back to the quarterback situation. Andrew, I'll start with you. How should Ohio State handle the quarterback situation for the Cotton Bowl with Devin Brown and Lincoln Kienholz?
Again, we're recording this Monday morning, and we don't know who else is going to enter the transfer portal. Because I think what I said on the pod that now is kind of remarkably outdated, that you should play 2. I still think you play 2. I still think you play Devin Brown and Kienholz, but I also kind of understand that, look, you bring in a guy, and you guys were talking about it earlier, a dude is not coming here if he's being told you're going to be, maybe you'll be the starter. Like, this is a job that you're going to want to come in and start at. And what does that do to Devin Brown? Like, does Devin Brown want to hang around for the bowl game? If that's the case, I don't know. So right now, as we say this, I would say you play Devin Brown, you try to get Lincoln Kienholz some work, because I don't know if the worry would be there with Lincoln Kienholz unless you bring in a guy who's going to be in his second year. So I think you just approach it as you're playing 2, and depending on who the guy that you're almost certainly bringing in now in the transfer portal to compete or outright start, I think that it just kind of depends on who's going to go, and I think that's why you have to play 2 of them. So I would play both.
I think you hit on something that is a tricky part of this dynamic, which is how quickly, if Ohio State does go in the portal for a quarterback, how quickly do they pull the trigger on that? Because it doesn't. And maybe we're looking at it the wrong way. Because either way, if Devin Brown is going to leave, why wouldn't he want this audition in the Cotton Bowl to be his chance to show people what he is? And frankly, he kind of probably needs to if he was going to leave immediately, because I don't know if anybody's looked, the portal's pretty full of quarterbacks right now. And there's a lot of guys. I was just reading, somebody had posted a thread on this talking about how the day 3 NFL draft quarterback market right now is taking a hit, because a lot of those guys are just going in the portal and looking for another opportunity. And you can stay in college for another year, make okay money with NIL, and try to come back next year with a better draft profile. Guys who are later in their careers. And that's an interesting way to look at this. So it's getting kind of crowded in there. And I think either way, my assumption as it stands right now is that Devin Brown is the starter and a big part of maybe the sole part of Ohio State against Missouri in the Cotton Bowl. And it's not because they don't want to. It has nothing to do with where Lincoln Kienholz stands, really, other than the fact that he is still pretty raw, is still very inexperienced, and Ohio State wants to win that game. Ohio State sees great benefit to winning that game on that stage and potentially improving its final standing in college football this year. And it's not as if giving Devin Brown a full game audition doesn't have great benefits too, if that is the guy who ends up having to be your starter going into next year. There are still a lot of moving parts here. I just think if you're going to use Kienholz, I guess what I could see, and this whole time that we've talked about, Devin Brown being the more mobile between him and Kyle McCord, this is kind of a weird wrinkle to think about. Like, they were closer, I would say, than Brown is maybe even to Kienholz. Like, Kienholz is the one who's the more athletic of the quarterbacks.
The best athlete.
He's the best athlete of these quarterbacks. So would you then just promote Devin Brown to Kyle McCord and then make Lincoln Kienholz the new Devin Brown and run kind of a red zone package with Lincoln Kienholz? Like, I could see something like that to just get to showcase some of his talents. But as I sit here right now, this morning, when everything is still very raw, as soon as this happened, my assumption was, well, assuming Devin Brown's ankles are okay, and I think that's not something we should assume is correct this morning, just because he had so much problems with him down the stretch. But assuming his ankles are healthy enough for him to play, that he is the guy for the Cotton Bowl.
I think Devin Brown needs to use this Cotton Bowl to show why Ohio State doesn't need to go find another quarterback. I think that's what this should be for him. I don't completely disagree.
That's a ways off, though. Like you might have to have your answer by the time the Cotton Bowl rolls around.
Oh no, I don't know. I'm not saying just the game. I'm not.
I mean, the practices matter too, of course, but I don't know how much that's going to change people's minds.
I mean, this is still Ohio State. I don't. And right now, as we're saying, that there's not a surefire hit in the transfer portal.
Sure.
Given the way this is going, I mean, this is Monday as we're recording this pod again, so a lot can change over the next couple of weeks here with the transfer portal, especially as teams wrap up their seasons. There might be quarterbacks who are starting for other teams right now in bowl games who might end up in the transfer portal because that's just where we are with this portal at that point. So I don't think they're going to, unlike the staff and some of the decisions they need to make there, I don't think they need to make this decision nearly as quickly as they do with the staff. They can probably take their time a little bit more than when they do with the staff. So Devin Brown, if I'm Devin Brown, I'm looking at this like I got 30 days to show this program why they don't need to go find another guy. They don't need to go find another starter because I'm the guy. I got 30 days here, and I got a bowl game at the end of this because we can either get out of that Cotton Bowl and be looking at Devin Brown like, oh, he's ready. He's ready. Give him a full offseason. He's ready to go in a way that maybe he just wasn't ready yet in year two because he was also a bit of a late bloomer, if you remember. That wasn't immediate 5-star status for that guy either. So he might just be awesome, and we're ready. This could be like how C.J. Stroud used the Rose Bowl in 2021 to push himself into a different conversation heading into that next offseason. Or it could be more of what we've already seen from Devin Brown, even in small sample sizes, and we're even more in a state of like, oh, the answer is not just that it wasn't Kyle McCord. The answer might not be on the roster right now. And that's a different conversation to be having. But Devin Brown can answer a lot of those questions over the next 30 days here.
It's difficult to assess as we sit here right now because, yes, he has these 30 days to do that. Well, it's actually only 25 from the time we're recording this. But he had 8 months to show he was better than Kyle McCord and didn't do it. Yeah. And he wasn't a true freshman anymore. He was a guy who'd been in. So, second-year guy, all over college football, second-year guys can do that. And he couldn't beat out Kyle McCord, who now we are looking at as the guy who didn't have enough of whatever Ohio State's looking for to, because if Ryan Day wanted him to stick around, I think he probably would have stuck around. Like we don't have the full story here from McCord. This may have been a completely his decision against Ohio State's wishes. We don't know that 100% yet. But there's reason to question whether Brown is ready for that. At the same time, I don't think anybody's ever questioned the underlying talent that he has. The combination of arm strength, mobility, that he's, that he can become a good college quarterback. But I think we just always were unsure whether it was going to happen soon enough for it to be at Ohio State. And I think that conversation was accelerated when he didn't win the starting job in the preseason, because now you're waiting until your third year at best. And with McCord coming back, it looked like then it wasn't going to be him. So I'm obviously, like everyone, intrigued by what a full game of Devin Brown will look like. We've never seen it unless you saw him play in college or high school. I mean, we've never seen it. So that is a very intriguing thing that's hanging out there right now as it relates to the Cotton Bowl. But can he do enough in the next 3 weeks to get to where he would like thrive in that game and leave a no doubt message as to who the starting quarterback is for 2024? I'm skeptical of. I think he can put himself in the front runner position, but that all depends also on who they're talking about bringing in. He can definitely separate you can definitely have a good enough game there to be like, okay, like that we understand that that is probably things that Lincoln Keenholz can't do yet in his career, and that Aaron Nolan might not be able to step right in and do. And now give him another 8 months of development, 8 months of his own healthy ankles, 8 months of putting a better infrastructure in front of him with an offensive line. Now you can start to see some of those same things that we were saying about Kyle McCord apply to Devin Brown. But as far as like walking out of there being like mic drop, that seems less likely to me.
And the thing that has to come into play here too is I understand what Steven's saying, but you do kind of have to move with a little bit of urgency, because this is, I mean, it's a game of musical chairs is what the transfer portal market at quarterback is. And at some point the music's going to stop. And at some point everybody's going to get their guy. And at some point, because not everybody is going to be in a situation like Ohio State, some teams are looking at it saying, come on in, we need you. I mean, like, I'm just throwing out an example here to show how this can happen. Oregon State lost both of their quarterbacks because their coach left. Like, think about other situations around the country where a number one guy can leave and there is just a very clear opening. And you don't want to be stuck in a situation where you're sitting around waiting or you're sitting around talking. I would bet you that they kind of know where they're at, because if you're waiting a little bit too long, what happens if Riley Leonard ends up at Notre Dame and Ward ends up at Oregon and I'm trying to think who Dante Moore ends up somewhere else, and then you're kind of sitting around going, we just missed a couple of guys that we could have been talking to because we were waiting on Devin Brown. Like, I think you kind of have to have your answer sooner rather than later.
But that's assuming that they want those guys anyway.
Well, sure,
maybe they've already looked at those. They might have already looked at those guys, and once again, all of this is two sides. Yeah. Yes, sure, the guys you want, but you also could have looked at those guys and already said no.
Right, of course.
So that's not even relevant anymore. That those guys are out of the portal because they weren't looking at them anyway.
But the guy that you do want, you don't want him to end up at somewhere else because you're playing chicken trying to wait and see with Devin Brown. Like, you do kind of got to identify who you want and go after him, I think, eventually, sooner rather than later.
We can also safely say that this wasn't triggered by Ryan Day going in to Kyle McCord and saying, I'm definitely starting Devin Brown next year, right? Like that. So
for sure.
It's not like that. It's not like he was at a stature where that was on the table. Like, I thought it made a lot of sense. I wrote it. Like, coming out of the game, looking ahead to next year already, Ohio State was going to have to reassess the current talent in that room. Each of those guys deserved that consideration. Like, Devin Brown had done enough, had been here for 2 years, had pushed Kyle McCord, according to Ryan Day's evaluation, had pushed him into the season as the potential starting quarterback. So you have to take another look at him after another year of development when it comes around to the spring, assuming he sticks around. Lincoln Keenholz had come here and has a different skill set that was, I think, worth evaluating when you look at ways that Ohio State's quarterback play might have lacked, whether that's Kyle McCord's fault or not. And then Aaron Nolan coming in with a completely different kind of skill set, really. I mean, this, mobile, but with that super quick release, and a guy who could just change the dynamic of the quarterback position for you. Like, all those guys deserved a look as the starter, even if you still had McCord as the incumbent and they were going to have to beat him out. So that always made sense to me, that you couldn't. That was, and I said this on the pod that we had, that very confusing pod that we did Sunday night, that it made sense to me that Ryan Day would say, well, I'm not going to tell you right now who's going to start on opening day 2024. Like, we have a lot of other good quarterbacks in this room. Why do you think I recruited it this way? I mean, he didn't say it like that, but that's how I was reading between the lines. It was more the immediate, like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do in 3 weeks. That was what put up flags.
I'm just trying to cover all bases here. And you're right. The combination of it's not like Devin Brown was lighting the world on fire in his small reps back when they were playing both of them early in the year, though it was clearly Kyle McCord's job. And Devin Brown was playing more of the spot role in those situations. But also, he got hurt in the middle of the year, which took a package off the table that they could have used him in. And so maybe he just looked like a guy who was early in his career, getting his first real meaningful snaps.
Sure.
And it could have gotten better through the year, because that's what happened with CJ. That's what happened with Justin. And even if Kyle didn't take the leap to Heisman Trophy level, but I think we can all agree that week 12 Kyle was better than week 1 Kyle. I think that's a fair assessment there. So What if Ryan Day just picked the wrong quarterback at the start of the year? Yeah, I don't want to say that's not a possibility at this
Right.
point.
No, I think that's a fair thing to throw out as a conversation topic because Ryan Day very clearly laid out to us, because we asked it from a number of different angles, right? We even asked specifically as it related to Brown and McCord, like, well, if they're right on top of each other, if it really is that close, and if Brown is for stretches winning this job, why don't you take the younger guy?
Mm-hmm.
I specifically asked him that at some point in the preseason, like in a press conference. And he said, no, in that case, you lean to the older guy. And I think because for in Ryan Day's head, and maybe we're getting to a bigger topic of conversation here, that it gets to what you're saying. Because I think Ryan Day has to reevaluate the way he looks at a lot of things. We've certainly called on him to look at his decision to still be the play caller, his decision to make staff changes, and how he organizes his coaching staff. Like, we've asked him to reevaluate those things, sort of called on him to. And this might be another one. Like, when he looks back on that decision, did he make the safer choice, which might have made good sense at the time, just as running the clock down to kick a 52-yard field goal at the end of the first half against Michigan made sense in real time. But if he had chosen the other guy, it would have been sloppier, but the upside would have been greater, and it might have led to something more. I don't know the answer to that. But that's where we sit at this point. He was talking about second guessing as it related to those decisions that he made against Michigan, and how you just kind of have to live with the second guessing, and that it's not the second guessing that bothers him. It's the loss and the players who miss out on what it's like to win the game and that sort of thing. This will be another version of that second guessing. It's already happening. It has been happening all season. There were people who have been adamant that he picked the wrong quarterback. And I don't think we ever saw that in the glimpses we saw in the spring or in preseason camp or when Devin Brown got to play in games. I didn't look at that and say, they clearly made the wrong decision. That guy, look at him. He's tearing it up. What are they doing? Like, we never, ever, ever saw that. I don't think. So it was all a speculation about what Brown's skill set was related to what McCord's skill set was. But in terms of actual execution, we never saw it. But that is going to be out there, and Ryan Day's, what can you do? Like, you can't take it back down. You made the decision you did. The only question is what decision goes forward. And more to the point, like, what did you do with Devin Brown in these past 3 months since the start of the year, 4 months, that helped him be the quarterback you might need him to be at the start of 2024? Because he wasn't good enough to be your guy at the start of 2023. He might be the guy you have to start at the beginning of 2024. Is he going to be ready then? That's the other part of this equation, that, Ryan Day gets some benefit of the doubt because it went from Haskins to Fields to Stroud, and the Stroud thing is obviously working out in an impressive way, both in college and in the NFL. But I'm going to push back a little bit on a narrative that I think that's out there, is that Kyle McCord failed this year, like, on his own. Like, there's a whole quarterback apparatus here that goes into making Kyle McCord the quarterback he is, and that goes into making Devin Brown the quarterback he is, and developing that whole room. And that didn't get to where Ohio State wanted it to be this year. And it's not all of the blame for that can't be inside Kyle McCord's skin.
Especially when there's three people who are cooking in that kitchen.
At least.
3 people cooking. At least 3 people cooking. It's too many chefs in the kitchen.
Kyle McCord thanked all 3 of the coaches.
One of them your paint. All 3 of them.
In his statement.
It's just
Day, Dennis, and Fish.
Like, once again, man, how many people do you need to teach one quarterback? How many people? Granted, this is only an issue. And we're pointing out a little bit more this year because it wasn't as great, because C.J. Stroud had the same exact apparatus and he thrived in it. So it's both ways. It can look ridiculous, but just like the decision to start Kyle McCord, if to your point, Nathan, if Donovan Jackson doesn't get blown by on the line of scrimmage and Kyle McCord completes that pass to Marvin Harrison Jr., maybe we're talking about a different conversation if they go down and score that touchdown. Or maybe Andrew or not, right? Like, maybe they get to the playoff and maybe they lose a playoff game. Maybe they don't win a national championship, and this happens anyway. Does this feel like this was on the table regardless of how the season finished? That Ohio State was going to be in the market for looking for another quarterback, regardless of how this season finished? Or was this a result of they lost to Michigan for a third straight year and their quarterback didn't always look great during the year?
I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know, because like we know how much a Michigan win would mean to Ryan Day and Ohio State. Like, we saw Ryan Day wearing that on Sunday. Like, when we talked to him, he was still kind of just this. He was not happy. Like, right? Like, he knew the questions that he was going to get asked, and that played into it too. But like, he was just not happy. So like, you wonder how much the Michigan loss kind of plays into it. Because if you beat Michigan, I mean, everybody's happy all the time, but the need for a quarterback would still be there. Because if everything else happened the way that it did, Ohio State would be the number 1 seed, and they would be getting ready to play Alabama right now. And I don't know if you've heard, but Alabama has this coach called Nick Saban, who's pretty good at what he does when he has a month to prepare for people. And I don't know, because you look at that situation and say, all right, if Alabama just completely just whips Ohio State's offense in the Rose Bowl or in whatever bowl that would have been, like, does that change things? I don't know the answer to that question. And I think it's a good question to ask, because like, what did I say yesterday on the pod? This is a results-based business, but sometimes you kind of have to look at the process too. Well, I don't know. Like, I think sometimes you have to look at the process too, because was Ohio State not looking at a transfer quarterback, and then Kyle McCord throws the interception on the last drive of the game, and Ryan Day is walking off the field going, all right, well, now we have to get a transfer quarterback. I bet you the seed was kind of planted in some people's minds early on that this might be a possibility, at least. So I don't think that you can say that it happened because of it, but I also just kind of look at this and see a situation that maybe, but it's a difficult question. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I know how to answer that one. It's okay. I'm gonna have to
Nathan,
think about that.
Do you think this might have been on the table regardless of how the season finished out?
No. I mean, if they had won the national championship, I don't think he's leaving. He's getting in the portal the next day, which is essentially the time frame we're looking at here.
Yeah.
But if he had won the national championship, which means maybe he doesn't make the mistake. It's just that I keep coming back to, like, Ryan Day was asked point blank Sunday night, was your quarterback play good enough this year? And he kept coming back to, well, we didn't win the game. Like, we didn't get it done.
Mm-hmm.
And it certainly sounds to me like he's putting more of that on quarterback play than maybe I would have. Because it doesn't seem to take into account any of the quarterback play that put them in position to also be able to win the game at the end of that game. And I know that that's a slippery slope a little bit, but I also think it's fair. And he was, he had the opportunity to say, yes, it was. I wish we'd been able to put a better offensive line in front of Kyle. Or, yes, I wish Kyle had been able to be fully the quarterback he could have been if he hadn't hurt his ankle. Or, I wish Emeka Buka had never gotten hurt. That really turned. He had a chance to say all those things and didn't. Like, he very much was saying, because we didn't get it done, everything has to be evaluated. Now, that may have in real time, maybe I didn't go far enough into reading into how specifically he was talking about quarterback when he said that, because it was the way he was answering a lot of questions that, everything is on the table for evaluation at this point because we weren't good enough this year. We're not in the playoff. Everything has to be evaluated, including me. That's kind of the message a lot of coaches send there. But more than, by the time we woke up this morning, it was pretty obvious that Ryan Day, you're right, that I think that this was whatever led to this point was probably not just what he said Sunday, that this was already probably going, it was already rolling in on one side or the other, and that was maybe just the thing that nudged it across the line.
The more I think about what he said and what sparked it, what this comment I'm going to make now is what you just said about the quarterback play, and I wish he would have put better things around him if he had had a healthy. He never said any of that stuff. He never had the reasonable excuse the same way he had for CJ when they lost with CJ, right? There was never the, we put too much on Kyle McCord's plate. And with CJ Stroud, that was his way of telling us that this is not on CJ. CJ did his part. Everybody else didn't do their part. And that's why we lost this game. Even when we were questioning, hey, would you take a look at the other quarterbacks? No. He's not why we lost. Whether it's the Oregon game, whether it's the Michigan games, or it's the Georgia games, CJ Stroud did exactly what was required of him in every single one of those games. We didn't lose because of him. That message, that tone, never came out of Ryan Day's mouth this year when talking about Kyle McCord, especially on Sunday when you're going, do you think you got enough out of your quarterback play? The answer was not, yeah, we just put too much on Kyle McCord's plate. It wouldn't have been true this time around the way it would have been true with CJ Stroud.
No, it was legitimate with CJ.
And I think and that's what it comes back to here of whether it's fair or not, this is the standard. If you put CJ Stroud on this team right now, this team probably wins a national championship because CJ Stroud doesn't make that mistake against Michigan. He doesn't make the mistake against Penn State, even if it didn't cost him. He doesn't make the mistake. He just doesn't make those mistakes. While also his ceiling is so high that in a results-based business, we can say, oh, Donovan Jackson getting blown by on the line of scrimmage and Kyle McCord having a player in his face is why that throw to Marvin Harrison Jr. wasn't completed and why their season's over. Well, CJ Stroud probably would have diagnosed that in pre-snap. Justin Fields would have solved it with his legs. And I know that a lot of this is not fair, but we're talking about a standard that's already not fair that Ryan Day has put out there publicly that's the standard. So we have to address it that way.
Yeah, I mean, the things that he said specifically that they put on CJ Stroud's plate in that Oregon game, for instance, 2 games into his sophomore year, first year as a starter, was a bad defense and a inefficient running game that held them back.
Yep.
And what did Ohio State have this year, especially in the second half of the year? You had a defense that seemed to get better every week. I mean, the defense, as you were saying, Andrew, unquestionably one of the best. I've been meaning to write a post kind of well, the defense still wasn't good enough to win the game, so now what for Ohio State? Because they were, by every metric, legitimately one of the handful of the very best defenses in the country this year. Just as I would say the defense, when we were speculating about this team coming into the year, the defense may have even surpassed what we thought it might have been able to accomplish this year. And in the running game, the second half of the year, you had Trevion Henderson running like a Heisman candidate. So both of those boxes were checked off. And that's the thing that you do keep coming back to. It's we said before the year that if you gave them all of those things, then Kyle McCord didn't have to be great. And then they gave them all of those things with still some offensive line issues and protection issues, which again came crashing down on him on the most important pass attempt of the year. So can't forget that. But I get the evaluation here. It's a tough business. That's what they signed up for. That's what Kyle McCord signed up for to some extent, is to that he knows the standard was this high. He was reaching for that standard. And by all accounts, anybody I've ever talked to is that he worked hard to get to that standard. People inside the program, people who've been around him, all he wanted was to be the next great starting quarterback at Ohio State. And this year he was merely the next great, pretty good, really good quarterback at Ohio State. And as we said, that's just, that doesn't, if you don't win that game with it, then you get what his last week probably was, which was probably horrible.
So that was a pretty meaty emergency pod. We'll continue to talk about this all week because things are changing, and this is an interesting conversation, especially as we'll probably take some deep dives into Devin Brown and Lincoln Kienholz at some point this week now, because we have to at this point, because that's the most important thing is how's Ohio State going to handle this quarterback situation going into this Cotton Bowl. But that's to wrap up this. It's Ohio State has created an unrealistic standard at the starting quarterback position. And because of that, really good isn't enough, as we've seen on the with how this season has played out, and as we're seeing with while Kyle McCord is in the portal right now. So they have to find the next guy who's going to meet that unrealistic standard. Maybe that guy's on the roster right now with Devin Brown and Lincoln Keenholz. Maybe that guy will get here in January with Aaron Nolan, or maybe you find a transfer quarterback. But when you create an unrealistic standard and you recruit the position the way you do, you have to find ways to attain that unrealistic standard, even if it's crazy to try to get there. But that'll wrap up this pod. Get the text 614-350-3315 as we're finding out more information as things continue to trickle out. We'll be texting it first, 2-week free trial, $3.99 after that, 614-350-3315. For Nathan Baird and for Andrew Gillis, I'm Stephen Means, and that was Buckeye Talk.